as we continue our series here in Nehemiah. Today we'll be in chapter 4. And chapter 4 is a chapter that resonates with most people on some level. Because no matter who you are, no matter where you grew up or how you grew up, you will or have faced opposition in your life. There are things, there are people that are working, usually against us, for various reasons. First, did everyone get one of these that wanted one? Think so? Okay. Just want to make sure everybody's good and they can follow along in notes. But opposition is not anything new to any of us. If you ever had that day where you wake up and it's kind of that day where you just, nothing feels right. Maybe you woke up an hour before your alarm was supposed to go off and you can't go to sleep. And you have a headache or you have this going on and you just kind of feel the day doesn't feel right. And that's only where it starts. Then you get to work and the coworker who was supposed to do what they did didn't do it, or so-and-so's sick, and then you're doing two people's jobs, and it compounds. We will constantly face opposition. And if we're not familiar with what opposition is, that is when something comes against us to stop us from doing what we're trying to do and moving forward or moving past, or sometimes it's bettering ourselves, and they're trying to stop it. So has anyone here ever faced what they feel like is opposition? Anyone ever faced that? Anyone face that this week? I feel like I faced that this week even. I think some of us, it's kind of an everyday battle. I know, because I hear things going on, and I get calls and text messages and Facebook messages and stuff like that. And me and Kristen had talked about this. It's like we know that things are happening in the church that are good because we're facing opposition from all kinds of people and all kinds of backgrounds. And it's not just the church itself, but it's the people facing the opposition. It's things going on in so many people's lives and so many things that are happening that we can't control. And I think that's part of what we see when we look with Nehemiah in chapter 4, is that they're trying to build and make progress and rebuild the city walls. That's what we've seen for the first 3 chapters. And in chapter 4, it is solely about the opposition that they are facing, people wanting to stop them from succeeding, stop them from moving forward, and how that goes. So opposition is not anything new to any of us. So I look at this, and what I saw when I was going through this, and I think it's even fitting for Father's Day, because I know as fathers there's opposition in balancing life. I'm new to it, but trying to figure out how to balance work, and then church, and then dad stuff, and then still help with anything around the house, and still get anything done. It's just kind of, there's only so many hours in a day, and I'm fortunate that I'm not a long sleeper. So it's like I can find ways to find time while Kristen and Ashley sleep for an extra couple hours. I can do other things. But finding that balance in life is another way that Satan tries to oppose us. And I want us to start by looking at opposition from the proper way. We may see opposition from individuals, from businesses, entities, anything like that. But I think if anything can get in and can disrupt us, we have to understand that Satan will use anything he can to stop us from living the life that God wants us to live. And however he finds his way in is the way he'll find it. So that's the first thing. So I don't want us, when it's referring to enemy or any of those things, that's not your neighbor. That's not the guy that lives down the street from you. That's not that Broncos fan. That's not that Raiders fan. It's not those people. The enemy that we're talking about is the devil. He might use some of those people that, the neighbor that comes and complains at you because your dog barked at the middle of the night or whatever it is. They're not the enemy. The devil is. That person, Jesus tells us that person, whether if we like them or don't like them, they are our brothers, they are our sisters, they are, the children of God. So I just want to make that clear when I'm referring to enemy. It's not that person you just can't stand. Okay? So that's not who the enemy is. But I do feel that when we are moving forward in life and we're trying to do God's plan, that's when we see the most opposition. Jesus himself in Matthew 16:23 tells one of his disciples not just one of his top 3 disciples, his 3 closest disciples, says, "Get behind me, Satan." Right? I mean, this is like the pastor. This would be like me telling Stephanie, who told me something, "Get behind me, Satan." Like, I don't know how she would feel about me using that phrase to her seriously, because Jesus wasn't like, "Oh, ha, ha, ha." No, he's like, "Get behind me, Satan." Like, this is stopping God's plan. This is stopping God's work. So even good intentions, and I think all of us know what they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But even good intentions can be used by the devil to stop what God has planned and what God is moving forward. In our life, I think the scariest moment should not be when you're facing opposition, but when you're not facing any opposition. Because if we're not facing anything, that means that the powers that be, the devil, Lucifer, Satan, whatever you want to call him, the enemy, is happy with where we are. So when life is perfect and everything's floating along and everything's just right, those moments to me are scarier. Because in part of it is, to me, it's like, okay, when's the rug coming out? Like, something's going to happen. But the other part is like, are we where we should be? And with Nehemiah, I don't think he has to wonder when the opposition will come. Because as we go through the chapters and we kind of recap, we see in chapter 1, he hears about how bad Jerusalem is. He fasts, he prays, he mourns, he confesses the sins of himself and his people. He remembers the promises of God. In chapter 2, he's before the king sad and afraid, because the king said, "Hey, why are you sad?" And he's like, "Oh no, this is either my make it or break it moment. Either I'm going to succeed and this is a chance where I've been praying for the king's favor, or the king's going to stay off with his head." That's the moment he's in. He's afraid. He tells the king, "I'm sad because of my city, that my ancestors are buried in Jerusalem. It's in bad shape. The walls are torn down. The city's in shambles." And the king says, "Well, how can I help? Send me back. Let me rebuild the city." So Nehemiah gets permission to go. And he could have stopped there, but instead he says, and he's bold by it, he said, "And if my work has pleased the king," and I wonder how many of us would be that bold about our own work that we do for people. "If my work has pleased you, if what I have done has been right, if my work has pleased the king, give me letters for the governors to the areas we have to pass through, and we also need timber to build the walls, and I need to build a house while I'm there too, so I'm going to be there for a little while." I don't think most of us have that boldness. That boldness is to be like, "Hey, if what I've been doing is good enough, you'll do this." But he does, and he is, and the king says, "Yeah, here you go." And the importance of the letters for the governors is because those governors were people who wrote letters in Ezra chapter 4 saying that you shouldn't allow them to rebuild. But then also because he's traveling 800 miles. That's not, I mean, like, if you've ever been in other countries, like here in America, you can travel 800 miles and you go through state after state after state. Think of other countries as being smaller than states. So think of it like the upper East Coast. If you've ever been over there, you can literally go from like one state to the next state in about an hour drive. That's how it was for them. You know, 50, 60 miles is another country. You know, every time you move through, there's more people, but then you go through different cities and villages that have different leaders. And so they're all in the Persian Empire that King Artaxerxes is over. So he says, "I need letters to them from you, the most powerful person in this empire, to say that I have permission to go where I'm going." So the king gives it to him. Chapter 3, he checks out the walls. That's where we got to see all those really fun names, actually, in chapter 3 that we went through last week, where it was really good to pronounce, but they started rebuilding the walls. He checks them out at the end of chapter 2. They rebuild in chapter 3, and everyone gets involved. Everyone helps. You know, people that lived outside the city, people that lived inside the city, goldsmiths, perfume makers, everyone gets involved. While they're working, because this isn't, they finished the wall, now they face opposition. But while they're working is where chapter 4 happens. They've been working hard to rebuild this wall for days and weeks, and then this is where we pick up. In chapter 4, verse 1, it says, Sanballat, who is more or less like the arch rival of Nehemiah, if you look at that through the story, Sanballat was very angry when he learned that we were rebuilding the wall. He flew into a rage and mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and the Samaritan army officers, "What does this bunch of poor, feeble Jews think they're doing? Do they think they can build the wall in a single day by just offering a few sacrifices? Do they actually think you can make something of stones from a rubbish heap and charred ones at that? His language points to his attitude. I think usually you can tell how angry someone is by the amount of adjectives they use to describe someone. So for him, what does this bunch of poor, feeble Jews think they're doing? He's upset. You can tell he's visibly upset as he's saying this. And he says it not only in front of his friends, but he's a Samaritan governor of Samaria, and he's saying it in front of the army officers. And as he continues, verse 3, Tobiah the Ammonite, who was standing beside him, remarked that stone wall would collapse if even a fox walked along the top of it. Then I prayed, hear us, O God, for we are being mocked. This is Nehemiah. May their scoffing fall back on their own heads, and may they themselves become captives in a foreign land. Do not ignore their guilt. Do not blot out their sins, for they have provoked you to anger here in front of the builders. At last, the wall was completed to half its height around the entire city, for the people had worked with enthusiasm. They're making fun of him. Nehemiah prays, and he continues working, and they finish half the wall. He doesn't stop. He doesn't quit because they're mad or he's worried. He keeps working, and they're succeeding. So then, when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs, Ammonites, and Ashdodites heard that the work was going ahead and that the gaps in the wall of Jerusalem were being repaired, they were furious. Did anyone else notice that the names of people's grown again? There's even more people involved who are furious. They all made plans to come and fight against Jerusalem and throw us into confusion. But we prayed to our God and guarded the city day and night to protect ourselves. Then the people of Judah began to complain, the workers are getting tired, and there is so much rubble to be moved. We will never be able to build the wall by ourselves. Meanwhile, our enemies were saying, before they know what's happening, we will swoop down on them and kill them and end their work. The Jews who lived near the enemy came and told us again and again, they will come from all directions and attack us. So I placed armed guards behind the lowest parts of the wall in the exposed areas. I stationed the people to stand guard by families, armed with swords, spears, and bows. Then as I looked over the situation, I called together the nobles and the rest of the people and said to them, don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord, who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. When our enemies heard that we knew of their plans and that God had frustrated them, we all returned to our work on the wall. But from then on, only half my men worked, while the other half stood guard with spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. The leaders stationed themselves behind the people of Judah, who were building the wall. The laborers carried on their work with one hand supporting their load and one hand holding a weapon. All the builders had a sword belted to their side. The trumpeter stayed with me to sound the alarm. Then I explained to the nobles and officials and all the people, the work is very spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. When you hear the blast of the trumpet, rush to wherever it is sounding, then our God will fight for us. We worked early and late, from sunrise to sunset, and half the men were always on guard. I also told everyone living outside the walls to stay in Jerusalem. That way they and their servants could help with guard duty at night and work during the day. During this time, none of us, not I, nor my relatives, nor my servants, nor the guards who were with me, ever took off our clothes. We carried our weapons with us at all times, even when we went for water. So you can see that Nehemiah was facing opposition. It wasn't just the, oh, they really don't like me opposition. It was, they're upset, they're angry, and then it went into, there's more of them. Now they're making plans to kill us, to stop the work entirely, just to stop what we're doing. So when we can see, I think we can learn a few things from the way Nehemiah handles opposition. One of the things that I don't even have in the notes here, but I think we've learned through the last few weeks and learning from Nehemiah and how he handles himself, is that he went to prayer first. Like his first tool in his belt, his first arsenal he uses is prayer. He goes to God. Instead of going and complaining or telling others or anything else, he goes to God. This is what's going on. This is what we need, God. You know what we need. So from that, I think there's 5 things we can learn from this, but 5 things we need to know. The first one is you will face opposition from your enemy. It's not a question of maybe or somehow or someday or by chance you might face this, but you will face opposition from your enemy. Anytime that things are going forward and making progress, it goes against anything that the devil or anyone outside of that, outside of the people that believe the same way as you do, you will face opposition. For them, Nehemiah and them, Sanballat and Tobias and the whole group of people there did not want them to succeed because they liked Jerusalem to be oppressed. They wanted them to be weak. They wanted them to be feeble. They wanted them to be able to be used however they wanted to, and no one to come in and help them be better. They were facing opposition through that. We know that there's so many scriptures that point to facing opposition and the way that we can handle that. Ephesians 6:12 is one of my favorite. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. That is where we're facing opposition from. It may come from other directions, it may come from other people, just like Nehemiah, it may be coming from all around where we are, but that's where it's coming from. And then, of course, 1 Peter 5:8, our devil, the adversary, walks back and forth seeking whom he may devour. And he's walking back and forth like a lion. He's looking to devour us, to stop us. Because we do have a real enemy in the devil. I know we can think that that's fiction, or that's movies, or that's this or that, but sometimes we have to recognize that anything he can do to stop us, he will do. And that's in church, that's in our life, and he can use anything he wants to do it. If you ever wonder why it feels like you take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back when you're trying to do something, this is why. Because you will face opposition. I think for us, anyone that's been part of the church planning process or the church board, we know that every time we take 2 steps forward and we're making progress, something happens, and you go backwards and you push forward again, and it's that constant fight of tug of war that you're playing with what feels like a car and 2 people, and you're just doing everything you can to hang on. Because we will face opposition. Anything that we move forward, any chance that we have to go forward, he wants to stop. He does not want to see us succeed. And that's the second thing, is that your enemy is enraged against you when you succeed. Because we see this with Nehemiah, that when the news reaches Sanballat and Tobiah that the wall rebuilding project had commenced, that it was going, they became enraged and mocked the Jews. They mocked them for rebuilding the wall. They mocked them for the things they were using to do the rebuilding. They mocked them for how they were rebuilding it. Anything they could do to tear them down, they mocked them for it. And Revelation 12:17 tells us the same thing, that our devil, the adversary, is enraged against us when we are moving forward, when we are seeing success. So Nehemiah responds to the ridicule and insults by praying. As we encounter spiritual attack, we too can combat it by prayer and fasting. I don't think there's any other tool that we need. We can read the Bible, we can talk to our friends, we can see professionals, we can do whatever we want to do, but the first thing we have to do is pray and fast. Pray, God, this is what I'm seeing, God, this is what I'm struggling with, God, I need you. Most of the time, our answers can start from there. Maybe our friends, maybe our families, maybe other people we go see will confirm it, they'll agree with it, they'll help you understand it better, but God is where the answer starts. Maybe we have to be open-minded first before we can go there. Because I know for me, if I get really upset about something, I'm enraged, or maybe I'm upset because my success isn't here, my success isn't there. I'll talk to a friend, and I have to be open-minded and willing to listen to my friend's advice. Because sometimes my friend's advice is usually like, you're doing great, things are good, or sometimes it's like, well, you're being an idiot, you did this to yourself. Like, I don't know if you've ever been told that by somebody, But you kind of have to be willing to hear it from someone else, like, you did this to yourself, like you're in this position because of the decision you made before. And that's why Nehemiah, I think instead of reacting, I think Nehemiah could have said to the people in Jerusalem, put on your swords, let's go out and fight them right now where they are. Like, they will not mock us. I mean, I think we've seen that in Scripture even, through many different battles where we're not going to allow them to mock our God. David's a prime example of it, where he goes out into war because they're mocking God. But Nehemiah says, I'm going to pray, and we're going to keep doing the work that God has told us to do. Instead of stopping to fight, instead of stopping to go seek war, he says God will handle it, and keeps working. And that's what we have to do. We have to keep working, keep moving forward. When we see that he's enraged, things will come at us. We have to move forward. And then, if you keep moving forward, after you know that you're facing opposition, you know they're angry against you, the next thing that happens is your enemy will escalate when the first attempts don't stop you. In very, very short terms, the best way I can describe it is things will get worse. The same with that, sometimes things have to get worse before they can get better, or it's always darkest before the dawn. All of those things are talking about this, because Satan will escalate before he tries to stop us. When he's trying to stop us, if he hasn't stopped us yet, part of the escalation is the opposition has grown. Instead of it being 3 guys that we saw earlier at the end of chapter 2, actually chapter 2 was 2, then by the end it's 3, then by this chapter we saw that it was the Samaritan officers 2, and now by this point there's like 6 different people groups in this. Like the opposition keeps growing. There's more people going out and they're fighting against him. And Jerusalem is what they're doing, is they're becoming more and more secluded. They're more private, they're more to themselves. And that's what's exactly happening to them, because the enemy will escalate. Then it takes it beyond just the people. Instead of mocking from a distance, now they're planning to stop them, stop their work, and then it became they're going to kill them to stop the work. They won't stop the work because we threaten. They won't stop the work because we're doing this. We're only going to stop if we kill them. Things will escalate. And that's what we have to know, and that's what we have to see, is that all the adversaries, they scheme together against Jerusalem to make a plan to attack them. They were talking about it enough that the people that were from Jerusalem that lived near them were going out and they were saying, you got to stop doing what you're doing. They're going to attack you. They're going to come from all directions. And what's Nehemiah do? They keep working. He prays and he keeps working. And he prays and he keeps working. And he keeps moving forward. And he keeps going on, hoping for that. And that's what we have to do. When we feel like there's not another breath we can make, there's not another step we can take, there's no way to get through the opposition, we just have to quit. It's getting back up. It's moving forward. Maybe we can't run, but we can crawl, or we can walk, or we can take just a small step forward, and that's moving forward against opposition. Then the fourth thing that we can see and that we should know is that we can resist the enemy. Stand strong in the Lord. That's the phrase. If you're facing opposition, if you can remember none of this, remember that. Stand strong in the Lord. Maybe standing strong in the Lord might be kneeling strong in the Lord. That might be praying strong, believing strong, having strong faith. But stand strong in the Lord. James 4:7, when you're facing opposition, pray and the devil will flee from you. Pray and the devil will flee from you. That it may not flee from you immediately. He may not leave. He may not get out of the way right this second, but you have to resist the enemy. If we're resisting, we're praying, we're believing, and he will flee. You will win. You will get victory over it, but you have to resist the enemy first. Because how easy would it have been for Nehemiah to hear the threats and say, okay, we're going to stop the work, and we're just going to set up guards around, and we're going to protect the city. We're going to protect the work that we've already done, because we've made more progress than we've made progress in 70 years. Like, I think we can say that, right? Have you ever been in that place in your own life and said, well, I'm better now than I've ever been, so maybe I just need to stop here and just try to figure this out first. Or, I've done this better than that, or I'm finally closer to where I want to be. I'm the closest I've ever been. I just need to stop here. I'm facing all this opposition. Just stop here and try to hold on to it. But instead, Nehemiah says, I'm not going to stop. But what does he do? He slows down the work. Half of the workers stay as guards, and half of them work. And then they switch. And then they switch. And then they switch. They're constantly on guard, 24/7 around the city. And that's what we have to be. We have to be on guard. We have to be ready. And that's what 5 is stand. Or 5 is part of the stand strong in the Lord. And 5 is be prepared for your enemy at all times. Being prepared at all times is when he's talking towards the end of it. And he says that they didn't take their clothes off at any point. Their soldiers, they had their swords on and they had their tools, and they never took their swords off. They had the sword in one hand and their tool in the other hand. Charles Spurgeon had a magazine called The Sword and the Trowel. That magazine title actually comes from this chapter, Nehemiah chapter 4, because it's the trowel is the tool that you use for masonry, for block, for building walls, for concrete. And then the sword is what you use for fight. It's what you use as your weapon. It's the main thing that you can use. But what also is the sword known as? Or what else is known as the sword? Ephesians chapter 6 tells me that this is a sword. And I think it's funny sometimes we don't think of it as a sword as much as we should. I think we think of it more as a butter knife. It's useful. It has use. It can get in a little bit of stuff, but you're not going to use it for everything, right? Like, how effective of a sword is it? For those that know me know I like to cook, and I like to use a smoker, so I like to smoke meats and stuff like that. If you ever smoke something, you cook something like a brisket or a pork or anything like that, and you take a butter knife to it, how far do you think you're going to get? I mean, you might get it done. You might actually be able to cut through and cut slices up, but you're going to be cutting like this, and sawing and sawing and sawing. And when we don't have an understanding of this, if we haven't experienced God's Word, if we haven't felt it, if we haven't studied it, we haven't read it, that's what we're doing. We're going into battle with a butter knife instead of a sword. We have the chance to have it. For Peter, when he wrote that to the Galatians, or Paul when he wrote that to the Galatians, they didn't even have a Bible. They couldn't go around like, here's my sword. Their sword was right here. That was it. What they retained, what they remembered, what they had memorized was what they could hold on to. And that's one of the reasons why we use a Bible that we give to high school graduates, because there's giving the sword, it's the power that is there. But it's the power that you can take with you. It's the power that moves. If we're going to be prepared for our enemies at all times, it starts with knowing how to use the sword. The other part of it is, when I worked in restaurants, they actually teach you something. Instead of, know what they teach you though? They teach you which knife is the appropriate one to use. Because there are times when a butter knife is appropriate. You don't want to go to a restaurant, you're trying to cut, butter your roll, and you don't want to be sitting there using a chef knife. That's one of those big 8-inch blades trying to put butter on. It's not the appropriate tool. But God's Word is a tool and a knife, and it's a sword. They even call it double-edged sword, so it's one that cuts both ways. But it's a sword that can be used and utilized for various purposes. But knowing how to use it is the first step. You have to know what works for this moment or what works in that moment. Being prepared. The other part of it is that he didn't take off his clothes because they wanted to make sure that when the fight came, they could run out immediately. It didn't say, give me a minute, give me 3 minutes. If you've ever tried to put on a leather belt that has a sword on it before, it's not the easiest thing to put on. It's not like It's not like these belts that we have now, where it's like, oh, it just slips through and it clicks on. Like, that's great. It's just like strap, and you got to tie it, and swords are heavy, so it's got to be really tight to hold the sword up. He wanted to be ready at all times. So as we're facing opposition, we have to understand that, unfortunately, there are no days off for him. The day that you think that, okay, and I think people that have been in ministry, around ministry for a while, know this and felt this. But there's like that day that you plan is like, okay, this is the day I'm going to do nothing. It's the day that something goes wrong. And that's in life, just in general. You say, okay, this Saturday, I have nothing planned. I'm going to do nothing that day. That's when you get called by a friend who's moving, or you get called by someone who's going through this in their life and they need help, or it's the day that something happens. And we can choose to react in two ways. One, resist it and say, oh, it's not real, it's not happening, I can't do it. Or we can step into it. Because when we're facing opposition, it will come, it will be there, and we have to be able to move forward. I think of facing opposition when I really think about it, and I think you guys might understand this now. I like to make Rocky movie references. Talk about the completing each other, got gaps, and you got gaps, and we fill each other's gaps. I think of facing opposition a lot like how Rocky fights. If you've ever seen any of the movies, he goes into a boxing ring and he takes blow after blow after blow. Like any normal person that wasn't in a movie probably would have been knocked out already and on the ground, because he takes beating after beating. By the time he gets to that last round and he's ready to go and he gets amped up, he can't see because his eyes are swollen, he's bruised, probably broken ribs, he's all beat up. And I think opposition from the devil is the same way for us. It's not always about how we get the fastest blow in, or it's not always about how we can take on this, but it's about how many times we keep getting up and we keep going back into the fight. Because we can choose to stop and quit, or we can choose to move forward and connect with it. And just say, I'm going to go. Because I think when we're ready, and we have the sword, and we understand God's word, and we're ready to use it the best way possible, we're ready to use what God is doing for us. So it's knowing how to use God's word. That's being prepared for our enemy at any time. Knowing that they're going to escalate because they're enraged, they're upset. Knowing we will face opposition changes how we go into the fight. None of those fights that you see in the movies and in real life. I have friends who do UFC fighting, and they'll tell you where you lose or win that fight is well before the day the fight ever starts. It's in the training. It's in the preparing. It's if they didn't get out and they didn't go to the gym, it starts well before that. Because it's the time that we have with God's word. It's the time that we have with each other to help each other. Proverbs says iron sharpens iron. That's two people together help make each other better than just standing on your own trying to fight for yourself. So as we face opposition, we face what's coming our way. Are we ready for it? Have we been preparing for it as the worship team comes up? And maybe you're facing opposition right now in your life it can be from so many different things. It can be from co-workers and workers and spouse and family. It can come from good things and bad things. And we can be facing opposition and not sure where to go and not sure which direction is the way up. And we have to understand and know the first thing we have to do is lean into God.